The Apache arrow missed Ezra Coleman's heart by less than an inch. He slammed his back against the red canyon wall, the hard rocks scraping his skin through his thin shirt. He could feel the splintered wood of the arrow shaft grating against his ribs. Every breath was a fresh stab of fire. His Winchester was clutched in hands that were shaking so hard he could barely keep his finger off the trigger. War cries echoed through Devil's Creek, bouncing off the stone walls, sounding like they were coming from everywhere at once. 3 of his team were down there, lying in the sand, good men, men with families back east, reduced to buzzard meat in the time it takes to draw a breath. The 4th, young Peterson, the kid from Ohio who was always writing letters to his sweetheart. He'd been screaming somewhere in the rocks, a high, thin sound that cut right through the chaos, until he wasn't. Ezra had never killed a man. He'd never even pointed a gun at another human being. His life was compasses and transit levels, the satisfying click of precise instruments. He drew maps. He brought order to the wilderness. He didn't spill blood in it. But the Apache warriors circling below, their painted faces a blur of rage and vengeance, they didn't care about any of that. To them, his map was just a different kind of weapon. A shadow fell across the canyon rim, just above him. Instinct took over. He raised the rifle, his arms screaming in protest, the sight wobbling as he tried to aim. He found himself staring into the darkest eyes he had ever seen. It wasn't the painted face of a warrior, it was a woman. She was beautiful in a way that defied the dust and the blood and the terror of the moment. It was a fierce, dangerous kind of beauty that seemed carved from the canyon itself. It stopped his breath, even as death whispered on the desert wind all around them. She held a bow in one hand, an arrow nocked and aimed right between his eyes. She could have ended him. Right there. Should have, by all the rules of this brutal, unforgiving land. Instead, she spoke a single word, a word in perfect, unaccented English that made no sense at all. Come. What do you do when your enemy offers you salvation? What do you do when the person who should be killing you is the only one who can save you? Ezra Coleman had come to the Arizona territory to draw straight lines on government maps. He was a man of logic, of angles and measurements. He didn't know it yet, but he was about to meet a woman who would redraw every single boundary of his soul. Her name was Esperanza Valdez. The Apache called her Ayana, which meant eternal blossom. She was 35 years old and moved with a fluid grace that spoke of a life lived on the knife's edge between 2 worlds. The daughter of a Spanish trader and his Apache wife, she was at home in a dusty mission or a smoky wickiup. She'd learned early, learned the hard way, that survival meant walking a line between 2 peoples who wanted nothing more than to see the other wiped from the earth. She led him through a crack in the rock face he never would have seen, a passage so narrow his shoulders scraped both sides. It opened into a hidden grotto, cool and shaded from the relentless sun. A small spring trickled from the rock, pooling in a basin of smooth stone. It was a sanctuary, a pocket of peace in a world of violence. "You are either very brave or very stupid," she said, her voice low and steady. She took a knife from her belt and began to cut away his blood-soaked shirt. Ezra winced as the fabric pulled at the raw wound. The arrow hadn't gone deep, but it had carved a groove across his ribs that burned like a brand. "Probably stupid," he managed to choke out. Her fingers were gentle but sure as she cleaned the wound with a cloth dipped in the cool spring water. They were skilled hands, hands that had done this before. "My husband would have called you a coward," she said, not looking at him. "Your husband?" "Iron Wolf, chief of the Chiricahua band." She finally met his eyes, and there was no flinching in them, no hint of apology, only a deep, unreadable sorrow. "He died last spring, a cavalry bullet through the chest." Ezra studied her face, the high cheekbones that spoke of Spanish nobility, the obsidian eyes that held all the fire and fury of her Apache blood. A man could get lost in a face like that, could forget who he was, what he was supposed to be doing. "I'm sorry," he said. It felt like a stupid thing to say. "Are you?" Her voice was cold. It carried no warmth, no forgiveness. "Your people celebrate when we die. I'm not a soldier. I'm an engineer. You work for them. I draw maps, nothing more." Esperanza let out a short, sharp laugh that held no humor at all. "Maps are weapons, senor. They show your armies where to build their forts, where to find our water. They show them where to drive us from the land that has always been ours." She pressed a fresh, damp cloth against the wound, and he hissed in pain. "This canyon," she said, her voice dropping to a near whisper. "The one you were surveying. It is sacred ground. It is our burial place." The weight of her words hit him harder than a fist. All those neat lines he'd drawn, all those precise measurements he'd recorded in his notebook. They weren't just geography. They were conquest wrapped in mathematics. He was drawing a blueprint for the destruction of a people, of their entire history. "I didn't know," he said quietly. The words felt hollow, meaningless. She finished wrapping a clean strip of cotton around his ribs, her hands moving with a practiced efficiency that was both terrifying and mesmerizing. "Now you do?" she said, her dark eyes locking onto his. "The question is, what will you do with that knowledge?" But as she tied off the bandage, her fingers brushed against a small leather pouch tucked into his belt. Her eyes narrowed. "What is this?" Before he could answer, she pulled it free. It wasn't his. It had belonged to Peterson, the kid from Ohio. He'd found it beside the boy's body before he'd scrambled up the rocks. He'd thought it was just a keepsake. Esperanza opened the pouch. She didn't pull out a locket or a letter. She pulled out a chunk of rock, shot through with a thick, gleaming vein of silver. Her face went pale beneath her sun-darkened skin. She looked from the silver in her hand to Ezra's face, and the look in her eyes was no longer unreadable. It was pure, distilled hatred. "You are not a map maker," she spat, her voice trembling with rage. "You are a thief." "I don't understand," Ezra stammered, his mind reeling. "That was Peterson's. He was a geologist with the team." "A geologist?" Esperanza's laugh was brittle, like shattering glass. "You lie. You are prospectors, looking for this." She held the silver aloft, its polished surface catching the dim light of the grotto. "The silver of the ancestors." She took a step back, her hand moving toward the knife on her belt. The sanctuary suddenly felt like a trap. The air grew thick, heavy with suspicion. "I swear to you," Ezra said, trying to keep his voice steady. "I'm a surveyor. The government hired us to map a route for a new fort. That's all I know." "The government does not build forts in barren canyons unless there is something here they want to steal," she countered, her eyes flashing. "For generations we have guarded this place. Iron Wolf died protecting this secret, the secret of the mine." A mine. It was like a thunderclap in the small grotto. Suddenly the attack made a different kind of sense. It wasn't just a random raid. It was a targeted strike. They weren't just defending a burial ground, they were defending their lifeblood. "My husband trusted a white man once," Esperanza continued, her voice dripping with venom. "A soldier. He made a pact with him, a promise of peace, and that soldier betrayed him, led the cavalry right to our winter camp." Her gaze was like a physical blow. "That cavalry was led by a man named Coleman." Ezra's blood ran cold. Coleman. His brother, Captain William Coleman. The pieces clicked into place with horrifying speed. His brother wasn't just stationed in this territory. He had personally requested Ezra for this survey mission. He'd called it a family favor, a chance for Ezra to make a name for himself. It was a lie, all of it. Ezra wasn't here to map a fort. He was the unwitting pawn in his brother's greedy game. He was the bloodhound sent to sniff out a treasure his brother was too clever to search for himself. William had used him. He'd sent him into the heart of a hornet's nest, knowing full well what was at stake. knowing his own brother and his team might die. "My brother," Ezra began, but the words caught in his throat. Esperanza saw the truth dawn on his face. She saw the shock, the horror, the betrayal. The fury in her eyes softened, just for a moment, replaced by something else. A flicker of pity. "Your own blood sent you here to die," she whispered. The accusation hung in the air between them, more damning than any verdict. The woman who had just saved his life was the widow of a man his brother had murdered, and he was the key to helping his brother finish the job. As night fell over the desert, it settled over the grotto like a black wool blanket, thick and suffocating. Esperanza built a small, smokeless fire from dried juniper wood. It cast dancing shadows on the cave walls, transforming her face into a mask of stone, her features etched with a grief that seemed as ancient as the rocks themselves. Ezra watched her move. He saw the way her buckskin dress clung to her body, the subtle curve of her hip, the strength in her shoulders. He had never been alone with a woman like this. His world had been one of books and instruments, of precise angles and cold, hard facts. Desire was something he'd read about in poetry, an abstract concept. It was not this visceral, gut-wrenching pull that made his blood hum and his hands tremble. He had to tell her the truth, all of it. "My brother's name is William," he said, his voice hoarse. "Captain William Coleman." Esperanza stopped what she was doing. She didn't look at him, but he saw her knuckles go white as she gripped the knife she was using to skin a rabbit for their supper. "He told me this was a routine survey," Ezra pressed on, the words tumbling out in a rush. "He said the army needed a strategic location for a new fort to protect the settlers. He never said a word about silver. He never mentioned Iron Wolf." She finally turned to look at him. The firelight played in her dark eyes, making them look like polished obsidian. "And you believe him?" "I did," Ezra admitted, shame burning in his gut. "He's my brother." "Blood means nothing," she said flatly. "It is just something to be spilled." She went back to her task, her movements sharp, efficient. "Tell me, Surveyor, when your brother finds this silver, what do you think he will do to my people to get it?" The unspoken answer was a nightmare. Annihilation. He wouldn't leave a single witness. He'd wipe the Chiricahua from the face of the earth to claim their prize, and he'd be hailed as a hero for it. "He won't get it," Ezra said, the decision forming in his mind, solid and clear as desert crystal. "I'll destroy the maps. I'll tell them the canyon is unstable, geologically unsound for a fort. I'll tell them anything." Esperanza looked up, a flicker of surprise in her eyes. "You would betray your own people? Your own brother?" "He betrayed me first," Ezra said, his voice hard. "He sent me here to die. He sent my friends to their graves." He met her gaze across the small fire. "What he did to your husband, what he plans to do to your people. That's not war. It's extermination. I won't be a part of it." For the first time since he'd met her, he saw something other than suspicion or grief in her face. It was a fragile, hesitant flicker of trust. "Why?" she asked, her voice barely a whisper. "Why would you do this for us?" He could have given her a dozen logical reasons. Revenge against his brother, a sense of justice, self-preservation. Instead, he spoke a truth he hadn't even admitted to himself until that very moment. "Because when I was pressed against that rock, waiting for a warrior to end my life," he said, his voice low and intense, "the only thing I could think was that I had never truly lived. I've spent my whole life measuring the world, but I've never actually been a part of it." He looked at her, at this fierce, broken, beautiful woman who moved with the certainty of the seasons. "You belong to this place. You're alive in a way I don't know how to be. I want to understand what that feels like." Esperanza was quiet for a long, long time. The only sound was the crackle of the fire and the distant cry of a hunting owl. Then she moved. She rose and crossed the small space between them, kneeling in front of him. She was so close he could smell the sage and smoke in her hair, feel the warmth radiating from her skin. Being alive, she whispered, her breath ghosting across his lips, means accepting that some things are worth dying for. Her lips were soft when they met his. They tasted of wild honey and wood smoke and a sorrow so profound it threatened to drown him. He had never been kissed before. Not like this. Not with a desperation that felt like it could shatter bone. He groaned, a sound that seemed to come from the very core of his being. When she pulled back, her dark eyes searched his face in the flickering firelight. "How is it possible," she murmured, "that a man like you has never been kissed?" "I was waiting," he breathed, the words raw and honest as an open wound. "For what?" "For you," he said. "I just didn't know it until now." And then he saw it, a faint, almost invisible scar that ran from her temple into her hairline, a straight line, too clean to be from a rock or a branch. It was the kind of scar left by a blade. He reached up, his fingers gently tracing the line. "What is this?" She flinched, pulling away slightly. The warmth between them vanished, replaced by an icy wall. "It is nothing." "It's not nothing," Ezra insisted softly. "Who did this to you?" Esperanza turned her face away, staring into the shadows at the back of the grotto. When she spoke again, her voice was flat, devoid of emotion. "Running Bear," she said. "The warrior who led the attack today, he was Iron Wolf's brother." The name hit Ezra like a physical blow. Running Bear, the man who wanted him dead. "Why would he do that to you?" "He believes I am a traitor," she said, still not looking at him. "He believes I am the one who betrayed Iron Wolf to your brother. He thinks I told Captain Coleman where to find our winter camp." The air in the grotto turned to ice. Running Bear didn't just see Ezra as an enemy soldier or a prospector. He saw him as proof of Esperanza's continued betrayal. Her saving him wasn't an act of mercy in Running Bear's eyes. It was treason. She wasn't just hiding from the cavalry. She was hiding from her own people. Suddenly, her situation came into horrifying focus. She was trapped, hunted by both sides. Too Apache for the white world, and now, thanks to Running Bear's poison, too white for the Apache. Her act of saving Ezra hadn't just put him in her debt. It may have just signed her own death warrant. The next 3 days passed in a strange, timeless haze. They were fugitives, sheltered in the Earth's secret heart, while above them 2 different hunting parties scoured the canyons. Ezra could hear them sometimes, the distant, orderly bugle call of a cavalry patrol, and later, the mournful, chilling cry of an Apache scout signaling to his companions. They were caught in the middle, suspended between 2 worlds of hate. During the long hours, Esperanza taught him the language of the desert. She showed him how to find water, how to read the tracks of a sidewinder in the sand, how to know a storm was coming by the smell of the air. In turn, he showed her his world. He explained the workings of his transit level, how the delicate dance of lenses and mirrors could measure the curve of the Earth. She listened with a fierce intelligence, her mind as sharp and clear as his instruments. But at night, a chasm of unspoken tension opened between them. They slept on opposite sides of the dying fire. The space filled with a desire that grew more potent with each stolen glance, each accidental brush of their hands. It was a dangerous, impossible longing, and they both knew it. On the 4th morning, the air felt different. Heavier. The sounds of the search parties had faded. "They are gone," Esperanza said, her voice low. "But they will be back." She looked at him, and a decision hardened in her eyes. "There is something you must see. Before you decide what to do with your maps, you must understand exactly what you would be destroying." She led him deeper into the canyon system, through passages that twisted and turned like the coils of a snake. Finally, they emerged into a place that stole the breath from his lungs. It was a hidden valley, a perfect bowl ringed by sheer redstone walls that soared toward the impossible blue of the sky. It felt like a cathedral. The rock faces were covered in ancient petroglyphs, spirals and stick figure hunters and animals that seemed to dance in the shifting morning light. The silence here was different. It was a living thing, a profound, holy quiet that settled over him like a blessing. "This is the place of the ancestors," Esperanza whispered, her voice filled with reverence. "The heart of our people." She led him to the base of the far wall, where a series of small stone cairns were arranged in a semicircle. "My husband is buried here," she said, her voice catching. She knelt beside the largest of the mounds, her fingers tracing the faded symbols carved into the stone. "And here, my children." The words hit Ezra like a physical blow. Children? Twin boys. A single tear traced a path through the dust on her cheek. They lived only 3 days. The fever took them, the same week Iron Wolf fell to your cavalry. The grief in her voice was so raw, so immediate, that Ezra found himself kneeling beside her without a conscious thought. He reached out, hesitated, and then placed his hand gently on her shoulder. "Esperanza." She turned to him, her face a mask of anguish, tears streaming freely now. "Do you see now why we fight?" she pleaded, her voice breaking. "This is not just land to us. It is not dirt and rock for you to plunder. It is our souls, our ancestors, our unborn children. When your people build their fort here, when they dig their mines, they will desecrate everything we hold sacred. They will erase us." Ezra stared at the small graves, at the silent, watching petroglyphs, at the woman beside him whose pain seemed to echo from the canyon walls themselves. In that single, crystalline moment, something inside him shifted. A compass needle that had been spinning aimlessly for years finally found its true north. "They won't build here," he said, his voice quiet but absolute. Esperanza's eyes widened. "You cannot promise that." "I can," he insisted. He reached into his satchel and pulled out the rolled canvas sheets of his survey maps and his precious, leather-bound notebooks. His entire career, his future. "I will destroy them. All of it. Without these, they have nothing. They can't choose this location." "Your life's work," she whispered, staring at the papers in his hand. "My life means nothing if it's built on the graves of children," he said, his voice thick with an emotion he couldn't name. He reached out, his fingers finding hers, intertwining with them. Her hand was small and strong in his. "You asked me why I would do this. It's because this matters. More than maps, more than forts, more than silver." She studied his face for a long moment, her dark eyes searching for something. She must have found it because her expression softened, the hard lines of grief easing into something new, something vulnerable. "You are not what I expected, Ezra Coleman." "What did you expect?" "Another man who sees only what he can take." She lifted their joined hands, pressing his palm against her tear-stained cheek. Her skin was warm, soft. "Instead, I find a man who understands what it means to give." When she kissed him this time, it was different. There was no desperation, no sorrow. It was a kiss of profound, soul-deep recognition. A meeting of two broken people finding solace in a world that had tried to tear them apart. He felt himself drowning in her, in the taste of her mouth, the feel of her body finally pressing against his. "Esperanza," he breathed against her lips. "Si, mi corazón," she murmured, the endearment spoken in her mother's tongue sending a jolt of fire straight through him. I don't know how." She silenced him with another kiss, her hands moving with a gentle sureness, unbuttoning his shirt, her fingers tracing the bandage across his ribs. "Then let me teach you," she whispered. They made love right there, among the ancient stones, with the spirits of her ancestors as their witnesses, and the vast desert sky as their cathedral ceiling. For Ezra, who had only ever read about passion in books, it was a revelation. It was the frantic beating of his own heart, the scent of her skin, the way she arched against him and cried out his name. It was a connection so powerful it felt sacred, a joining that transcended the flesh and touched the soul. Afterward, they lay tangled together in the shade of a twisted juniper tree, her head pillowed on his chest, his fingers tracing lazy patterns on her bare shoulder. The world felt quiet, peaceful. For a few precious moments, there was no war, no betrayal, no two worlds waiting to rip them apart. "What happens now?" he asked into the stillness. Esperanza lifted her head, her long, dark hair falling like a curtain around her face, shielding them from the world. Her expression was somber. "Now," she said softly, "we go back to being who we were before." "I don't think I can do that," he said, his heart clenching. "You must," she insisted, her voice gaining a sharp edge of urgency. "Your brother will not stop looking for you. And Running Bear, he will not give up his hunt." As if summoned by her words, the unmistakable sound of approaching hoofbeats echoed from the mouth of the canyon. Not one horse. Dozens. Esperanza was on her feet in an instant, a warrior reborn. She pulled on her clothes with a fluid efficiency born of a lifetime of danger. "How many?" Ezra asked, scrambling into his own shirt, his heart pounding against his ribs. She listened for a moment, her head cocked like a hunting cat, her eyes narrowed. "Two groups," she said, her voice grim. "Your people, from the east, mine, from the west." Her dark eyes met his, and in them he saw a terrible, tragic certainty. "We are trapped between two worlds, mi corazon," she whispered. "Just like always." But then her eyes widened in alarm, staring past him, toward the entrance of the sacred valley. Her hand flew to her mouth. "No," she breathed. Ezra turned. It wasn't just his brother's troops, or Running Bear's warriors. There was a third party, a wagon. A heavy, dust-covered supply wagon, flanked by 4 grim-faced men in civilian clothes, rifles held at the ready. Men he recognized. They were part of the geological survey team attached to the main force, the men Peterson had reported to. They weren't soldiers. They were corporate men, representing the interests of the Transcontinental Railroad. This was never about a fort. The fort was a lie to get government funding and military protection. This was never about his brother's greed. William was just a pawn, same as him. This was about the railroad, about a river of iron and steel they planned to drive right through the heart of the Apache Nation, right through this sacred valley. The silver was just a bonus, a way to pay for it all. The scale of the deception was staggering. This wasn't just conquest. It was industrial-scale annihilation, planned and executed by men in boardrooms 1,000 miles away. Men who saw this land not as sacred, but as an asset on a balance sheet. Esperanza saw it too. She saw the wagon, the grim-faced men, and she understood. The terror in her eyes was replaced by a cold, hard fury. "They will not stop," she said, her voice a low growl. "They will never stop." The two groups of riders converged at the mouth of the valley, blocking the only exit. On one side, Captain William Coleman, resplendent in his blue uniform, sat astride a black charger, 20 cavalry troopers arrayed behind him. On the other, Running Bear, his face a mask of scarred hatred, sat on his war pony, flanked by 24 of the most feared warriors in the territory. Between them, the 4 railroad men and their wagon stood like a monument to greed. The fragile peace of the sacred valley was shattered. It had become a tinderbox, and they were standing right in the middle of it. Captain William Coleman rode forward, his horse kicking up clouds of red dust. He stopped 20 yards away, his eyes cold as chips of ice. Ezra had seen his older brother angry before, but never like this. This was a cold, controlled fury that was far more dangerous than any screaming rage. "Ezra!" William's voice cracked like a whip. "Step away from the savage. We'll discuss your lapse in judgment, like civilized men." Ezra felt Esperanza stiffen beside him. He moved, almost without thinking, to stand slightly in front of her, his hand resting on the Colt revolver she had insisted he carry. "Her name is Esperanza Valdez," he called back, his voice ringing with a confidence he didn't feel. "And she saved my life." "Did she?" William dismounted, his movement stiff and angry. His hand never strayed far from the polished holster on his hip. "Or did she set the trap that killed Peterson and the others? We all know what these women are capable of." The accusation hung in the air, a deliberate poison meant for his troopers. Ezra saw it land. He saw the doubt flicker in their eyes, saw them shift their grip on their carbines. These were good men, but they were tired, scared men who had buried too many friends. They saw an Apache, and they saw an enemy. "She had nothing to do with it," Ezra said firmly. "It was Running Bear's war party. She pulled me out of the canyon after they attacked." "Running Bear!" William spat the name like a curse. "He answers to her, boy. Don't be a fool. You think it's a coincidence his war party is here now?" From the other side of the clearing, Running Bear let out a harsh laugh. "The white captain speaks truth for once," he shouted in heavily accented English. "She brought you here. She brought them here. She betrays us all." The accusation, coming from both sides, was staggering. Ezra looked at Esperanza, saw the flash of pain in her eyes. She was being crucified from both directions. "I am no man's woman," Esperanza's voice rang out, clear and defiant, silencing them all. "I am a widow, trying to protect the bones of my husband and my children from desecration." William laughed, a hollow, ugly sound. "Sacred ground? That's rich. Your husband was a murdering butcher who slaughtered settlers in their beds. He got what he deserved." "Iron Wolf defended his people from invasion," she shot back. "Iron Wolf broke a truce," William roared, his face purpling with rage. "He made a pact with me, and he broke it. He paid the price." Ezra froze. A truce? William had lied. He'd told the inquiry he'd been ambushed, that Iron Wolf had led him into a trap, but he'd just admitted there was a pact. He'd admitted it in front of 20 of his own men. Esperanza stared at William, her expression one of dawning horror. You were the one," she whispered, so low only Ezra could hear. "You were the soldier he trusted?" The pieces fell into a new, more terrible pattern. William hadn't just killed her husband. He had betrayed him. He had broken a promise of peace, and in doing so, had condemned them all to this endless cycle of violence. "Enough!" Ezra's voice cut through the tension. "Whatever happened between you and Iron Wolf, it doesn't change what's happening now. This valley is a burial ground, William. We can't build here." "Can't?" William's eyebrows rose in disbelief. "Boy, you seem to be forgetting who gives the orders here. Those men," he gestured to the railroad contractors, "have a charter from Washington. This land belongs to the railroad now. Your survey was just a formality." The final lie was exposed. His maps, his work, it meant nothing. It was all just a show. "Then the formality is over," Ezra said. He walked to his satchel, his movements deliberate. He took out the survey notebooks and the canvas maps. He walked to the small fire they had made that morning. Without hesitation, he tossed them into the embers. The dry paper and canvas caught instantly, curling and blackening. Months of work, his entire career, his brother's justification for being here. It all went up in a plume of greasy black smoke. "Jesus Christ, Ezra!" William screamed, his composure finally breaking. "Do you have any idea what you've just done?" Something that should have been done a long time ago, Ezra said, turning to face him. William's hand dropped to his gun, but before he could draw, before anyone could react, a new voice cut through the air. It came from one of the railroad men. "Forget the maps, Captain," the man said, a greedy smile spreading across his face. He was holding up a device Ezra had never seen before, a strange metal box with a swinging needle. The boy's geologist wasn't just looking, he was leaving a trail. The man pointed toward a series of small, almost invisible notches carved into the rock face leading deeper into the valley. "He marked the primary lode for us," the man crowed. "We don't need the map maker, we just need to follow the signs." Peterson hadn't just found the silver, he had marked a path directly to the heart of the mine. In his scientific enthusiasm, the poor kid had signed the death warrant for Esperanza's people, and Ezra's grand gesture, his sacrifice, had been utterly, tragically pointless. The canyon held its breath. For a moment no one moved. The smoke from the burning maps drifted lazily toward the sky. The railroad man's words hung in the air, a death sentence delivered with a smile. Then all hell broke loose. Running Bear let out a blood-curdling war cry and kicked his pony forward, his warriors surging behind him. They were not aiming for the soldiers. They were aiming for the railroad men, for the wagon, for the man holding the device that pointed toward their sacred secret. "Fire!" William roared, and the cavalry line erupted in a volley of carbine fire. The canyon became a whirlwind of noise and chaos. Gunsmoke, war cries, the screams of men and horses. It was a maelstrom of violence. Ezra shoved Esperanza behind a cluster of boulders as bullets whined past their heads, chipping fragments of stone from the rocks. Through the smoke, he saw the railroad men go down, their greed earning them a swift and brutal end. He saw Running Bear, a fearsome avatar of vengeance, leap from his horse and charge toward William, a tomahawk raised high. William drew his revolver, firing twice. Running Bear staggered, clutching a bloody shoulder, but he didn't fall. He kept coming, his face a mask of unstoppable hatred. Ezra knew, with a sickening certainty, that this was the end. The valley would become a slaughterhouse. No one was getting out of this alive. And then Esperanza did something he never expected. She ran. Not away from the fight, but into the very heart of it. "No!" she screamed, her voice cutting through the din. "Stop this! No more death!" She placed herself directly between William and the charging Running Bear, her arms outstretched as if she could physically hold back the tide of violence. It was the bravest, most foolish thing he had ever seen. Time seemed to slow down. Ezra saw William's face, contorted with rage and surprise, his revolver still aimed at Running Bear. He saw Running Bear's eyes, wide with shock, his tomahawk frozen in mid-swing as he saw his sister-in-law standing before him. For a single, impossible heartbeat, the fighting stopped. Everyone stared at the lone woman standing in the path of destruction. And in that moment of silence, a single gunshot echoed through the canyon. It wasn't from William's revolver. It wasn't from a cavalry carbine or an Apache rifle. The shot came from the supply wagon. One of the railroad men, thought to be dead, had dragged himself up, a pistol in his shaking hand. He wasn't aiming at a warrior or a soldier. He was aiming at the only person trying to stop the fight. He was aiming at Esperanza. The bullet took her high in the chest. She didn't cry out. She simply folded, a look of profound surprise on her face, and dropped to the red dust of the canyon floor. The spell was broken. The world exploded back into violence, more furious than before. But Ezra didn't see it. He didn't hear it. His world had narrowed to the woman lying in the dust. He ran to her, oblivious to the bullets flying around him, and gathered her into his arms. Blood bloomed across the front of her buckskin dress, a terrible crimson flower. Her beautiful dark eyes, now clouded with pain, looked up at him. "Mi corazón," she whispered, her voice a fragile thread. A trickle of blood ran from the corner of her mouth. "Don't you dare!" he choked out, pressing his hands against the wound, a futile, hopeless gesture. "Don't you dare leave me now." She gave him a faint, sad smile. Her hand came up, her fingers weak, and touched his cheek. "It is better this way," she breathed. "No more. Trapped between worlds." Her eyes fluttered. "The gold," she whispered, her voice fading. "Iron Wolf's cache. Red rocks. Where the eagle nests. Trade it. Trade it for peace." And then the light went out of her eyes. Esperanza Valdez, who had lived her life on the knife's edge between two warring peoples, died as she had lived, caught in the crossfire. A wave of incandescent rage washed over Ezra. It was a fury so pure and so absolute that it burned away all his fear, all his grief, all his hesitation. He laid Esperanza gently on the ground. He took the Colt from his holster, and he turned to face the man who had caused all of this. His brother. William was still locked in a life-or-death struggle with the wounded running bear, but his eyes were on Ezra. He saw the look on his brother's face, saw the gun in his hand, and his expression shifted from rage to alarm. "Ezra, don't!" he yelled. "This isn't your fight." "You made it my fight," Ezra roared back, his voice raw with anguish. He raised the pistol, and everything went black. 6 months later, Ezra Coleman stood on a dusty street in Prescott, the territorial capital. He was a different man. The soft edges of the engineer had been burned away, leaving something harder, leaner, more weathered. He had woken up in a field hospital with a pounding headache and his brother standing over him. One of William's troopers had clubbed him from behind with a rifle butt just as he was about to fire. The fight in the canyon had been a massacre. Running Bear was dead. All of his warriors were dead. 10 cavalry troopers were dead. William had taken a tomahawk to the leg that would leave him with a limp for the rest of his life. The railroad had its valley, or so they thought. Esperanza's last words had not been a plea. They had been a weapon. Ezra, using her cryptic directions, had found the hidden cache. It wasn't silver. It was gold. Decades of Spanish gold, plundered by generations of Apache raiders, hidden in a cave high on a cliff face. A king's ransom. He didn't use it to buy peace. He used it to buy war. He hired the best lawyers in San Francisco. He sent notarized affidavits to every major newspaper east of the Mississippi. He used Esperanza's gold to fund a relentless campaign of truth. He told the world about the illegal railroad charter. He told them about the silver mine they were trying to steal. And he told them about the truce his brother had made with Iron Wolf and how he had broken it. He used William's own words spoken in the canyon against him. The scandal was enormous. The railroad's charter was revoked. The Army, facing a public relations nightmare, launched a full-scale inquiry. Captain William Coleman was court-martialed, not for murder, not for theft, but for the one crime the Army could not forgive: conduct unbecoming an officer, lying to a board of inquiry. He was stripped of his rank and dishonorably discharged. A broken man. The Army, eager to put the whole affair behind them, officially declared the canyon a permanent Apache reservation, off-limits to all settlement and prospecting. A hollow victory won at an unbearable cost. Ezra touched the simple wooden marker he'd placed on a small hill overlooking the town. It didn't bear her name. That was too dangerous. It just said, "A woman who walked between worlds." He had brought her body out of that bloody canyon himself and buried her here, where no one would ever desecrate her grave. He had avenged her. He had protected her sacred ground. He had gotten justice, but it felt like ashes in his mouth. He had come to Arizona to draw straight lines on a map. He left having learned that the most important lines between love and hate, good and evil, honor and betrayal, are never straight. They are twisted, and they are soaked in blood. The sun was setting behind the mountains, painting the sky the color of a dying fire. The wind whispered through the dry grass on the hill, and for just a moment Ezra could have sworn he heard her voice on that wind. whispering a truth she had taught him in a hidden grotto a lifetime ago. Being alive means accepting that some things are worth dying for. If this tale of forbidden love and impossible justice stirred something in your soul, I'd be honored if you'd share where in the world you're listening from. Like this story if it moved you, and subscribe for more tales from the American frontier, where love and loss are two sides of the same tarnished coin, and every sunset brings not the promise of a new beginning, but a reckoning for the past.